So I am A. Slayton. I'm a fantasy writer.
I'm AMS. I'm also mostly kind of a fantasy writer.
I'm Alexa Windsor, and I'm a horror and fiction writer, mystery writer.
I'm gonna act as like the mic stand. You can turn me when you guys want to say things, because this thing has a huge range for some reason.
So together we are Words After Dark.
Quick disclaimer, same disclaimers we gave yesterday. We love to give everyone advice. The problem is that not everyone, or not all of our advice will immediately suit you. There is no one way to make a book. There's no one way to run a D&D campaign. There's no one way to write a video game. Whatever your project is, take what advice we give you and tailor it to your own needs. Like, no one's word is law.
So the other thing is we like to run these as more of a discussion between us and you guys. So at any time, if you have any questions, raise your hand and we'll take questions throughout the entire panel.
We do have points that we like to hit on, so if we kind of feel that we're taking a lot of time with questions, we may kind of put a pause on it so that we can move on to the other points that we feel we should be on.
And if we don't get to you, we actually have a meetup right after this in the backup cosplay meetup area. So if we don't get to you, come and bother us like face to face, and then we can't ignore you. Okay, so we're gonna get into it?
Sure.
Okay, so we're gonna start with the idea of outlines. And I can hear everyone collectively sighing at me already. We also hate outlines, like it's not just you. The benefit of them is that you can generally structure your story pretty good ahead of time if you use one. I find nothing's more disheartening than writing an entire first draft and realizing that you have to basically rewrite it from scratch because your plot doesn't make any sense. An outline at least helps keep the building blocks of your story in order and helps make sure that they're sound, and it will really save you a lot of time when you're doing editing.
It also helps you catch a lot of things way ahead of time, where maybe you're overusing a character or maybe you're overusing a plot device. If you have that written down in an outline, that gives you something to look at and see, oh, wow, I'm actually killing off 6 characters in 2 chapters, maybe I shouldn't do that.
It also helps you to catch potential plot holes ahead of time before your readers catch them. But if you have an outline in an overarching, like story right in front of you, you can also invite friends to look at said outline to see if it would make sense to them.
There's lots of different kinds of outlines. We all do our outlines a little bit differently, and if you look online, there's like tons of different suggestions of how to do them.
I have a link. If you come and see me, I can give you a link that's like a master post of 111 different kinds of outlines.
Or you can join the Discord and ask for the link.
Yes, you can join the Discord to ask for the link.
So the one thing I would say when it comes to outlines is do the kind and as much as you think is going to help you. If a lot of people use one kind of outline, don't feel inclined that you have to use it. Don't feel inclined that that's the one way to go about things. Ultimately, it's a tool for you to use. It's not a tool for anyone else. So use whatever you think is going to help you the most. And if only having half an outline helps you, then for all means do that. Don't feel inclined like you have to follow strict guidelines.
One of the things you'll find is that a lot of our advice is, I don't know, how do you want to do it? Which sounds kind of lazy on our part, but writing is a very individual activity. So we're here to give you guys ideas, but it's really up to you to find the ones that work best for you.
One thing that I find helps me when starting an outline, and I don't really know where the beginning is and where the end is, take everything in your head and do a massive brain dump. And it doesn't have to be in order. You don't even have to have it in any chronological sense at first. Do a brain dump, go back, and then organize it all into chronological.
This actually goes for a lot of things. You can edit stuff that's on a page. You can't edit stuff that doesn't exist. So throw it on the page and then you'll feel a lot more organized. Tell us.
I find it a little bit easier using something called the snowflake method, where I have a general main idea that I start with, and then I make branching arcs. Like, I know that this is where I want this subplot to go. I know this is kind of how I want my main arc to go. And so I just kind of fill out my ideas via those arcs. And what's good about that is that then I'll have kind of a bigger picture looking across this span and how it kind of looks. And then I can kind of take those branches and collapse them into one story. But like I said, that's kind of the method I find works best. I kind of like toying around with other methods just because I find if I do make a chronological outline, as I'm writing it, that's gonna change no matter what. So
That's the other thing, is that outlines are roadmaps. They're not set in stone. If you get halfway through your story and you're not following your outline, write yourself a new outline. Like, oh well. But you can then use the parts of the story you have to help dictate the rest of it. An outline just helps guide you to where you need to be.
Yeah, definitely. That's good advice, because that's something that comes up a lot, I think. And I think that's a common problem where people are like, oh, well, my story has sidelined itself, gone off the outline. You shouldn't feel like you're restricted by it. As for Mouse and I, we do things a little differently than Alexa. We generally like to have like chapters of the same sort of length, so we know, okay, there's going to be 3,000-ish words in this chapter, and we mostly do chapter by chapter, just like kind of a summary of what is going to happen, and then that gives a nice, simple overview of the entire book.
When he says simple, he means it. I remember writing the outline for Ashen Path, and the first chapter has 2 bullet points. The first bullet point says, bad guys have a conversation. The second bullet point says, the inn burns down. That's it. That was the whole chapter. Because that was the only parts of the chapter that I needed. Anything else that happened in the chapter was a bonus. Well, what did they talk about? Bad guy stuff. All that stuff was implied to be covered, and I didn't have to leave myself a note for it, and it let me be a little more flexible. Some people feel that outlines really box them in. So if that's the case, then just give yourself a barer outline. Give yourself more room.
Yeah, I've heard the complaint before that I don't like outlines because it feels like when I do an outline, then it feels like I'm done writing it. Like, it feels like I've already written the book.
Your outline might be too detailed.
And if that's the case, then you might have too detailed an outline, and you might just want to leave it at the simple points.
Alternatively, one thing that I'm going to be experimenting with in the near future is somebody's theory of making an outline, starting from the top, filling in more details, and basically working from the top of a pyramid down, if the bottom of the pyramid was the details. So writing in descriptions, writing in actions, and then writing in dialogue. So you're basically writing the novel from that point, rather than just starting from the beginning and working to the end. So that's like...
There's lots of ways.
Yeah.
So many ways. Okay, are we gonna...
Now we'll actually talk about...
Yeah, now we're actually gonna talk about plot, now we got that out of the way. This is largely your vote.
Okay, so we're going to kind of talk about the difference between a story and a plot, because most of the time they're used synonymously. But really, what a plot is the structure of the story. Think about every crime show. Crime shows usually start with the crime, in the middle is the investigation, the end is the arrest, or the resolve of this case. Now, the story is the events that take place. The story is the characters that are acting throughout that plot. So, like I said, the plot is the generic crime structure. The story is the difference between law and order and criminal minds. Also, think of how many fairy tales there are. Red Riding Hood has a general plot, which is your red character goes into the woods, gets attacked by a wolf, things blow up, and then there's an axe guy. But the story is the difference between, say, Red Riding Hood, the movie, and a comic book illustrator doing a darker version of it. It's their story, but they're basing it off of the Red Riding Hood plot. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
No, this is.
Okay. So, also what's good when you're writing your story is to kind of figure out how you, the passage of time that goes on. Is this taking place in a matter of minutes? Is this taking place in days worth? Whenever I read the Harry Potter books, I like to, it usually takes place over the span of a year. A few days will pass while they're in Diagon Alley, they'll be on the train, then a matter of months will pass where they're just kind of doing their general school stuff. As the climax nears, it will start taking place in a matter of hours that will span over 3 chapters. And I always like to see when that day span starts. You know, like,
when does the time shrink happen? Usually
Yeah.
near the end.
And that's a very common thing. I know even in a lot of our books we have that same thing where
I was just thinking about that, I'm like, wait, I've used that.
indeterminate amount of time passes in the beginning of the book, maybe weeks. But as your climax is usually more of like an instant or a
Usually
short
someone
amount
has a
of
very
time.
bad day.
Yeah.
It's usually.
So as you near the climax, usually things slow down.
it might even help you to keep a timeline of the events. You don't necessarily have to date everything that's going on, unless it helps you, unless it's taking place at a specific time of year. Like I think one of my books takes place over Halloween. Well, it would help if I don't have 2 Halloween days in a row.
You mean you have murders happening on Halloween?
No. Spoilers. Another really good example that I always like using is a story by Tobias Wolff called Bullet to the Brain. It takes place in a bank. The main character walks in just to do, an errand, and some robbers come in and take everybody hostages. And so we can take the question.
I know, I'm just pointing out that she exists, because I had no peripheral vision.
So the main character gets shot in the head. And immediately the story goes to a matter of milliseconds where he's thinking of memory after memory, basically seeing his life flash before his eyes. And that was just fascinating to me, to where it was just taking place in a matter of milliseconds, but he was having an entire character development arc in that span of time as he was dying.
So, when writing like in a matter of hours, it seems personally to do it easier to show the passage of like a couple hours than a couple of days or months without it getting the repetitive a month later or a few months later or just using the weather. Is there another way that you guys have found to kind of show the passage of time rather than telling the reader directly, okay, a couple months later?
Do you want to?
Don't talk about it.
Really.
Honestly, like the Melancholia books are a great example of that. If things are happening with characters, your reader is going to pick up on the fact that time has passed. Unless you're explicitly stating, oh, this was 2 days later. But I specifically don't like having any amount of time, unless it's important to the story. If something happened the day before and that was important, then you want your reader to know that it's the day after. But as long as things are happening in the world and if it's a book where you're showing different viewpoints, then your reader will pick up on the passage of time. Is there anything you want to add to it?
2 things. One of them is that I second all of that because, like you said, both the MK books use that a lot. Specifically, if the amount of time that passes doesn't matter, if it's not plot relevant, it probably doesn't really need to be brought up. Readers will assume time is happening. Time happens to everybody. So if you go, and then this, they go, oh, well, this happened after that happened. How soon?
You could talk about how sick the characters are getting, of each other. and then, go on to the next events, if that helps you.
Another thing I find that helps is rather than mentioning how much time has passed, just do a clean cut. End the chapter, start the chapter up to the time ago. Don't even, because that's what chapters are. Chapters are an end of a sequence of events. So cut it there and then pick up when the new things happen.
Would that be relevant in like a comic book setting as well?
Yeah.
I think in comic book setting it's even easier because you have a lot of tools that you can just use to imply the change of time. But yeah, end the scene, start a new scene.
If you're like making a comic book or a movie, you'll see, people put up time cards or put a little stamp at the bottom to show, a little bit of time.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that in comics, but yeah, if the time is relevant, you can literally just write 6 months later because it's a comic book and you can get away with that because there's a tradition of it. Good point.
Sorry to rewind back to the outlining stuff, but I had a specific question about like the mystery style. Like, do you plot out in your outline or the snowflake style like when people are going to find clues, or do you find that's easier to? Okay.
Yes, you want that to happen so that you can make sure nobody is getting too much information at once. And what's also good is to plot out the person who done it. Like, write yourself an outline of the events from their point of view, so that you know what they would have left behind at a certain time.
Does like which character finds it
Yes.
also matter? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I run a lot of RPGs, especially at conventions, and the one that kind that I always have to put the most effort into are mystery ones, because
There's a reason why we don't write mysteries and why she does. It's because they're more work.
I have found a lot of books on the subject which I study too, which I can also give you a list of recommended reads.
But anyway, go on.
Go on with the question. I didn't mean to cut you off.
And allowing for the fact that it is a different art form. Running an RPG is very different than writing a book. A lot of it is about control of information. When do the players discover what? And one trick I will very often use is that if things are slowing down or if they seem stuck, I will slip them a clue. And I can do that because I know exactly how everything was done and who did it. So I can keep the whole framework consistent.
This is why having an outline is so
Yeah.
important.
That's also why you need to know, like, even if the character doesn't find out about the entire crime or the entire crime happened behind closed doors, you need to know as the author how everything happened.
I can sympathize with that creating an RPG because I know how things can slow down when everybody is flirting with the bard. I want them to get on with it.
As a player who's always flirting with the bard, no.
Guilty.
No. I thought it was always the bard was flirting with everyone else.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a two-way street.
Can't be a bard.
There's
So let's
yell. Stand even.
are there ways to write stories out of order without it being needlessly complicated?
We're gonna cover that actually. Oh, are you pointing at me?
Yeah.
I'm being called out. Okay, this is where an outline will completely save your whole life. You will want to write it, or at least make your notes, in sequential order. Because you want to make sure everything makes sense in sequential order. After that, you can put it through a blender for all everyone cares. But taking that extra step and putting it in an organized fashion for yourself will be very useful. Lost Names does, it tells 2 stories at the same time. And the first story ends before the second one starts. So when you're reading it, you're going back and forth in time.
Are there some ways of making sure the reader knows it's out of order?
That actually,
Timestamps?
Sometimes you can get away with timestamps depending on the style of story. You're gonna want to use reference points. Okay, so what's the last major thing that happened that the reader experienced? Okay, so when was that in relation to this? If it's something before that, maybe your character acts a little bit differently because they haven't discovered that, or haven't endured something terrible that you're gonna put them through, because that's what we do, right?
Yeah, a couple of the books that happens in of our books, the reader knows because specific characters that are involved are dead in the other
I was
in
gonna
the
say
other-
melancholia effect does this.
Yeah. So the reader knows something's up. They might not know exactly when, and then that's really up to you as the author to figure out like the best reference points to use.
It's like a mystery. You want to plant clues for them.
Beta readers can also be super helpful for that because you have somebody read it, you know the whole thing in your head, so like you're not the best reader of your own work. But if you have somebody read it and they're like, I'm kind of confused, like what's going on here, then you know that you got to work on something.
Kiki.
I wanted to ask, like, how do you? I'm outlining something right now because I'm a writer myself, but what I want to ask is, how do you keep your side plot from completely overruling the rest of your story? Because I have a whole side plot I'm doing. I'm trying to write a love story, but I have this huge side plot. Well, one of the characters meet with family members. However, sometimes I'm outlining it, I feel like I'm spending too much time focusing on the side plot than I am on the love aspect of the story.
You might need to cut some of those ideas down. And it's always a tragic thing as a writer because you're like, but I have all this useful stuff. I want to put it all in there. For the reader, like it's just not always possible in order to keep your story as streamlined and focused the way you want it. But save the ideas.
Yeah.
Because you can always apply them in other ways.
Okay.
Books are both as big as you want them to be and also never big enough.
Yeah.
So it is figure out the parts of it that are the most important and prioritize those first.
All right.
Adversely, if you find that your subplot is actually taking on a life of its own, consider making that the main story.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that might be your plot.
I was gonna say that too. If that's something, that's one of those times I think when you need to step back, especially if it's a common problem that you keep running into. Step back and see like, is it because you enjoy writing that more? And if so, then maybe you should restructure your story to cover more of that. But that's really your call too.
We should probably jump to some world building notes before we take more stuff. Just looking at the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the other questions, we see you, but we're going to try and get more content covered, then we'll come back to you. We're going to move on and do some world building, and then we'll answer, if you have more plot questions later, you can still ask them. Setting is a character, and it will help shape your characters. There's a lot of things, it has its own personality and its own sense of internal continuity. So whatever story is happening to your characters, depending on the scale of it, it might also be happening to your setting.
You also kind of have to build it like it's a character.
Oh yes, you have to
If
figure
you
out
came
all
to
of its
our
facets.
panel yesterday about characters, so.
I think all of us could agree that the town in It, Stephen King's It, it's a character.
Oh, it's absolutely.
Takes on a
Derry
life.
Main is a character.
Yes, Derry Main is a character that affects everybody in its own ways.
And that's not the only example. Whatever city Blade Runner takes place in is a character.
The Wizarding World of Harry Potter.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Like Hogwarts is a character. And the way they are set up not only lends atmosphere to the story, but they give you a kind of idea of what that story is going to be like. Your setting is a toolbox for you to pull from, and a way to give your reader a heads up of what they're getting into. So how do you build a setting? One of the ways that I like to do it personally is I like to look for a tone. What kind of story am I telling? And this goes back to the idea of your setting being a toolbox. If you're writing a mystery story, then it is going to be slightly different the way you describe your setting and the way you set up your world than if you're writing an adventure story, even if those worlds are functionally the same.
I want to talk briefly about like a comfortable mystery. It's got its own, I'm one of these, it's got its own subgenre within the mystery, big genre. Basically, a comfortable mystery is the main character has an occupation that, they are doing at the same time they're solving these mysteries, or it's a group of friends, and they're drawing from their own life experience. Now compare that to the darker mysteries that are more gritty, where you have a detective.
As they compare it to a noir novel.
Yeah, compared to a noir novel. They usually interact with different people. They usually have their own different kinds of character arcs and their own different kinds of backgrounds than those in a cozy mystery.
Another thing to be concerned about, also Catman if you need the microphone. Another thing to be concerned about is how much of your setting do you need? And I find a fairly good rule of thumb is how much time in your story are you spending there? One of the things, we have this note under plot, but I'm going to cover it now, because I'm a rebel. If you are not spending a lot of time in a setting, there really is not a lot of payoff in fleshing it all out. A better way to do that is to be like, okay, I need to destroy this whole town. I mean, do it, the plot demands. But then show the remnants of that, and use that as a way to display the effects the setting once had on those characters. Rather than spending, your first 30 pages describing a place that you're just going to destroy.
Which is exactly what happened in a novel that I read. I won't name it right now, but they spent the first 30 pages, up to 5 chapters describing this really cool world that I would have liked to see more of. Too bad the main character comes back and it's all been wiped out, and then we never visit that place again for the rest of the series.
Yeah, we can take some.
I know this kind of seems obvious, but would you say it's best to get the world building done before you start outlining plot, or?
Yes and no.
Get as much as you need plotted out beforehand, and then if you find that you need more, you can add to that world building.
Okay.
Setting is a character, so like characters, you want to write enough that you have a sense of internal continuity,
Yeah.
and you want to give yourself room to discover some things.
Is the one thing I've struggled with is finding the order of things I should do things, and should I write the villain first, should I write the main character, whatever.
You must look inside yourself.
No.
Try it, experiment.
Yeah.
We also, I can find the links, but there are also resources that you can use, templates that will help you think of world building elements. So you can look through that, decide, hey, I might need this for later, and that can change, but you at least have an idea, before you go into it.
Oh.
So the other thing I think is, it's not good to look at them at setting, characters, and plot standalone, because they all,
Is that so on?
they all affect and interact with each other. So you're never going to be able to just build your plot and then stick it in your setting and stick your characters in it. It's going to feel really weird.
Especially your characters, because your characters developed in that universe, and it's going to leave a mark on them.
Yeah.
All right.
You are next.
Okay, I'm dealing with an interesting creative challenge. And make no mistake, I love creative challenges, but I have this situation where I created a web comic just for funsies that combined elements of Ranma 1/2, Edgar Rice Burroughs on Mars, and a Daft Punk video. And
Which Daft Punk video?
it was not actually a video, it was a sequence from Interstellar 555.
I know that movie like the back of my head.
It's a great movie. But it's I combined all those elements, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do 10 pages of this for funsies. But out of all the projects I'd attempted before, that was the one that got a fan following.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept running with it, and 80 pages later, I figured out that, you know what? I should really stop making this up as I go along and actually design a setting. How do I design a setting at this juncture? I mean, it's I would like to have some kind of consistent world going on here.
Write down everything that you have.
Make a list of everything you already know.
Yes.
And start from there.
Yes.
I built the setting for Lost Names by pulling from media. I pulled from Dread, I pulled from Blade Runner, I pulled from a lot of fantasy novels, weirdly, even though it's a sci-fi novel. So make yourself a list. Check it off, okay, what do I already know? And what is the logical points that I can extrapolate from there?
And whatever logic the universe has.
Oh, we skipped him.
Not a lot, but there is some.
So as far as going in terms of developing a certain plot, a certain logical plot points, I'm trying to, and what would you recommend in terms of trying to develop, say, more a sci-fi horror plot in terms of
The way to prevent something from feeling forced is to give it adequate support beforehand. So if it feels forced, you might have to restructure the way you lead into that scenario.
What kind of story are you trying to write?
Yeah.
It might help if you're writing a mystery or if you're writing more of a fantasy to look into that specific genre and, you know, what's typical in that genre.
And see
for
what tools
kids.
are available.
Yeah, also look and try and think about what you want your reader to experience and how you can accomplish those sorts of things.
But yeah, things like certain plot points feeling forced usually just means that they're inadequately explained, or that they could be supported better by character interactions. So yeah, look at the way you lead into the event. We skipped you, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, do you have any tips for dialogue? My biggest problem with writing in general is getting straight to the point with
Say them out loud. Have, like, if you want like an exchange between two people, grab a friend, read the dialogue between you, say it out loud, because then that's gonna like let you get a feel on whether it's natural or not.
I mean, that's good for if you already have dialogue, but if you're struggling with
Are we gonna give the same piece of advice?
I don't know. Go on.
RP,
Yes.
find someone, take your characters, write them with someone, co-write.
Yeah, honestly, writing your characters and writing them outside of their source media. So if you're writing a book, then try and take them, give them situations that might not be their normal thing. Try and flesh your characters out more. Role play with other people, co-write with other people. That's all going to...
The more hours you put into your character, the more natural it will sound, generally.
Yes.
We have so many heads.
We can just do one sweep.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna
This
go
way?
you in front and then you in behind.
And then we'll go to this side starting from the back up.
We only have a couple minutes, let's go.
Alright, I've had this one character that at the beginning of the story that's just meant to kill off my main character, but I feel like I'm making her like seem like too important for something that might happen later in the story or might appear later in the story. Like how do I make this character seem like not so important at all?
Okay, are you trying to convince your reader that she's not important, or are you
Yeah,
trying to
like
lessen her importance to the story?
Like she's just there only at the beginning.
You're probably going to want to focus on the way other people interact with her, or how the way the narrative interacts with her. If you make those things unremarkable, then she just becomes a consistent force. Yeah, sure, she's in everything, she's around all the time. But as long as she isn't pivotal, or as long as she isn't doing things that immediately draw attention to herself, it'll be easier for her to fade in the background.
Also, if your main character is dying, focus more on what it's like, the experience of that dying, rather than the person who's doing the killing.
Okay, so in world building, if you're creating something that takes place not this world, then what do you recommend for, like, you know, the animals and the plants and etc., and mixing like things that do exist in this world and not, like...
I've done this a couple of times in a couple of different ways. I'd say odd is an example of that, and also action path, so I've had to do it like more than once. What you want to do is sit down and figure out, okay, what is necessary to be different? You probably don't have to name 10 different types of trees that don't exist here. Trees are trees. You can just they're green. They exist. But find the parts that are unusual and figure out how they play into things, how they might naturally come up. Because chances are to the people in the story, they're not strange, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to describe these things as they happen and as they encounter them. How much of it do you want? How weird is your setting?
If you need some inspiration, look at all of the, you know, aliens in Star Wars. What do they find it necessary to tweak to their, you know, creatures to make them a little bit different?
Yeah.
And figure out how your world is going to react to your world, and the people in it are going to react to it. These creatures might be dangerous to them. They might be pests, but like Mouse said, they're probably not.
They're not
strange
new.
to them.
Yeah.
Because they've lived with them.
And that actually plays into a point that I skipped earlier, where when you're designing a world and you're putting characters in it, you want to figure out how characters get their necessities. How do they get their water? How do they get their food? How do they get their clothes? Do they have trade? So ask yourself, like, look at yourself in your daily life and go, okay, what do I do with my day? And then you go, okay, how do my characters have access to the things they do during their day? And that will give you more points for your world building and give you more excuses to bring up those differences.
As someone who routinely writes dogs in my mystery novels, I have some important dog characters. They don't talk, but they have mannerisms. It helps that I was a dog walker for 3 years, and I know a lot of small dog mannerisms that actually work with writing. So that's entirely possible.
Okay, we have. Okay. Stretcher.
I do a slice of life cartoon on YouTube, and I'm wondering, what are some good subjects I could tackle in to make the show seem more original and less cliche? Like, what are some good themes for a slice of life story?
I don't usually like to kind of directly tell somebody what topics I think would be good, but if you're looking at for smaller, like, story arcs that you can put your main character through, you could, I don't know, look for any kind of mystery. You know, it doesn't have to be somebody murdered, but like
The mystery
an
writer
item
suggesting
goes,
mystery.
an item goes missing. You can look at it from a seasonal point of view. Hey, is it summertime? Write some things that character could do during the summer. Each episode.
I would say with a slice of life, what you might want more is like a fresh perspective, like a unique angle on something that everybody's familiar with. That might be what you would be looking for.
One of the things that I was going to suggest was look at other media that covers slice of life things and see how they do it and be like, okay, this is a topic that I'm interested in, and then you cover it slightly differently.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I do, but it's so hard to come up with an original story that really is exciting, you know?
Writing is hard.
Also, everything has been done before.
Oh yeah, everything's already been done.
Yeah.
Every idea has already been written. The whole point is writing it the way you can write it.
That's a common question and complaint we have is, oh, my story's not original. Nothing's original.
None of them are.
Don't worry about it.
Everything you write is going to have your own individual thumbprint with it. That's the reason why there are so many fairy tale iterations out there. Because people who write it, yeah, we've all read that story of Red Riding Hood before, but this person's going to do it a little differently. And people enjoy that.
Slice of life is like that too. There's a lot of people who really like it. There was a hand way in the back.
Yeah.
I'm writing a superhero story about alchemy, and I was thinking at the very end I would have one of the main characters die and then be resurrected via the Philosopher's Stone. But I'm worried that the death and the resurrection will feel kind of fakey. Like, I'm worried that it won't have a lot of impact because of the resurrection, or that it'll feel pointless. Do you know how to
Okay, so there are a lot of movies out there which resurrect their characters.
Also, that's a big superhero comic thing. So you're right in genre for it.
Yeah, so don't worry about it.
I will take that one. You actually almost I basically had that happen in one of my books. It's all about how much you sell it and how much the reader knows about, like, do they know that the Philosopher's Stone can do this? Does that matter? Because if the reader's expecting it, then it definitely is going to come off as a little more, I guess, forced, or it will lose some of its effect. But if it's more of a surprise, then I think it's better.
Another thing to consider too is that dying and or having someone die on you changes you as a person. So one of the ways to sell it is to make sure that the characters don't react as though it was a cheap trick.
Yeah.
If the characters take it seriously, your readers are more likely to take it seriously. Are we gonna call it there?
You can probably do another 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay, we can take 4.
I have a question related to that. It's a little different, but I was gonna kill the main character at the end of the story, but then there would be like a part 2 which takes place 15 years later. I'm not entirely sure how to sell that because I'm planning on having this character die by being assassinated after the climax. So.
How did the world change in 15 years?
Yeah, if this person's important enough to be assassinated, what is their lack of existence? How does that impact the world?
How do people react to having this person die and then walk back up and, be like walking around again?
No, he's not going to come back, but I'm just worried that it'll make the ending feel like cheap and then lose interest for like part 2.
If you're concerned that there's not enough worthwhile material to cover in itself, then cut the story when the character dies. And give yourself a shorter epilogue. Because otherwise, you might risk that. If you're going to stick that information in there, make sure that it's very relevant and it's going to be important for not only the completion of the first story, but leading into your next one.
Oh, by the way, Captain America did that. He was stuck in the ice, came back a little while later, and then we got sequels out of it.
Yeah.
Oh, right, sorry. Do you have any tips on how to make like the characters seem like believable friends, like that they're not just friends because they're the main group, but they would actually become friends anyway, like they're actually good friends, if that makes sense?
What do they do in their spare time? How do they hang out? Have them like write a side story where they're going to a slushie store, and then what do they talk about?
It's really about how they interact. If they interact in a way that you would expect friends would interact, then that's going to come off as normal, as genuine.
You're also going to want to have them seek out interactions for reasons that aren't demanded by the plot. Because chances are when you like to see people and you like to talk to them, you're going to do it just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
So that will give you a lot of chances to use those interactions to your to their best work.
Back to the whole talk on setting. I've had issues in my book where people have said, it seems as if all the places in there are more BS because, well, the school is one main point, the main character's house is another, but because writing more connections between individual characters is harder unless they're somewhere different, I had them walk to, let's say, a pizza shop, and he's just like, I don't even know where the main character's house is compared to the school. So how do I know where the pizza shop and the other guy's houses is supposed to be?
I think your reader is nuts.
Yeah, a lot of that, unless it's like plot relevant as to where things are, it doesn't matter.
That sounds like it would be extraneous information to most people, so
Yeah.
you might want to run it by another beta reader. Unless it's confusing about how they're getting these places, then you might want to be in, they walked, they biked, they took a bus, they drove. But other than that, the specific location should not.
Yeah, I think most readers will fill in the blank and create like a mental image of, okay, they live,
That's not
10 minutes walk from.
That might be your reader.
They did.
We got one more. Gloved hand.
Hello.
Hello.
So, I feel like I'm kind of stuck right now because what I have a bad tendency to do is create the character first and then the setting and then like the whole story. So currently I have like a character who likes mushrooms and makes potions, but then I get stuck. Like I have his house in my brain and I've been eternally stuck creating like a world around him and how to flesh out his world and then how to create the setting and from there a plot maybe.
You want to work backwards.
Need a plot generator? There are plenty of those online.
So what you want to do is go, okay, your character makes potions. What kind of a world is that a necessary skill? What kind of a living do they get from it? Are they well paid? Are they paid at all? Why is that? What does that mean? Where do they get their materials? What kind of materials are they able to work with? What kind of clothes do they wear, and what does that mean in their society? Do they have a society? Are they a hermit? And if they are a hermit, why?
Yeah. Who do they interact with on a daily basis, and what do they do?
It also might be cool to like look into, hey, what are some of the rare materials that they've read about in books and would like to get themselves? That could be, a nice leadway into a, hey, I'm gonna go on a trip to see if I can get this rare mushroom or this rare flower.
And that makes your world bigger. If they know about things that aren't immediately in their backyard, it gives you a chance to work in those nuances. But yeah, there's lots of information in your character about your world.
And a lot of the times I find that you'll actually, so if you go off of like who they talk to, a lot of the times you'll find out that, oh, I want to make a character based on this friend of theirs. And then you can expand from there and your world gets that much bigger. I just think, I know we're very character based, so that's how, a lot of how we do world building.
So having characters and not having places to put them.
It's just work from your character, work from what you know, and expand from there. Don't try and just put things down just because you need a world.
Okay, so that's basically all we've got time for.